Semafor reporter Dave Weigel has been on the road with Democrats and Bernie Sanders, capturing the mood of the left as high-profile lawmakers seek to capitalize on the base's energy and anger after Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer failed to mount a government shutdown in protest of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Dave is our guest on today's show. Democrats are now going to districts where Republicans are refusing to do town halls, and this is really interesting because Republicans are wary of bad optics that show them getting shouted down by frustrated voters. Those are, of course, exactly the optics Republicans used to their advantage during the Tea Party years. The dynamic of politicians ignoring or condescending to their own voters made for iconic juxtapositions. A recent poll found Democrats finally expressing significant dissatisfaction with party leadership. That drew, of course, more parallels with the Tea Party. Now, the Tea Party basically became the MAGA movement after GOP leadership tried to shut down populist outrage and endlessly lectured stalwarts like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Jim Jordan. I'm going to ask Dave about all of that. By the way, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Is this good or bad for Democrats? I mean, that's one of the big questions here. Is it a less hostile version of Trump's hostile takeover of the Republican Party? Bernie Sanders is on his fighting oligarchy tour. He brought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez along for some key stops that drew really big crowds. Here's one clip of an event that Dave covered over the weekend.
The senator, the man, the friends, the person who has helped bring all of us here together today, Senator Bernie Sanders.
NPR says these are, quote, record crowds, and Sanders seems to be reprioritizing away from progressive cultural messaging, which was always unnatural for him as a leftist anyway. Here's how he responded to a question from Jonathan Karl of ABC on immigration just yesterday, and many people know Bernie Sanders used to sound a lot more like Trump on immigration. He called open borders a Koch brothers proposal and argued, actually a long time ago, that it was something that suppressed working class wages. So here's how Bernie Sanders responded to Karl's question yesterday on ABC.
Is there anything that you think Trump has done right?
Yeah, I mean, I think cracking down on fentanyl, making sure our borders are stronger. Look, nobody thinks illegal immigration is appropriate.
Karl also asked him if AOC should head to the Senate, and Bernie, who has also criticized the press from the left for a very long time, got pretty irritated.
Is he joining the Senate?
Right now, we have, as I said, just a whole lot of people in the Congress. Okay, Jonathan, thanks.
Wait, I got one more. This is important.
No, I asked you.
Okay.
You know, you want to do nonsense, do nonsense.
No.
I don't want to talk about inside the Beltway stuff. I got 32,000 people.
I was just asking you about AOC because she was out there with you.
No, fine, but I don't.
So Bernie went on to tell Karl that he's tired, he's 83 years old, and he is happy to be serving Vermont in the Senate. The future of the party, though, could depend very heavily on what Bernie Sanders himself decides to do going forward, and what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decides to do going forward, and how Bernie Sanders helps Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez makes that decision about what she should do for the future. Now, Dave, again, covered the Tea Party. He covered Bernie's first presidential run and his second. He covered Trump's rise and the MAGA movement on the ground at all of these different populist rallies over the last decade plus. And he joins us now to discuss what he's seen from Democrats over the last week or so. Dave, thank you for being here.
That's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so you've been on the road. Could you tell us just a little bit about what it was like following the Bernie Sanders tour with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seeing people? I have a lot of questions for you, especially because you used to cover the right. You still do, but you've been to some of those prior rallies on the right that are now being compared to what's happening on the left now. So tell us a little bit about what you saw. Have you noticed prices creeping up? I know you've noticed prices creeping up. Groceries, gas, everything's costing more. Tariffs are kicking in, markets are all over the place, and people are wondering, is your retirement built to handle this? Well, that's exactly why we've partnered with Augusta Precious Metals, because when the economy shifts, smart investors look for ways to protect what they've built, and historically gold has done just that, holding its value through inflation, recessions, and even financial crises. A gold IRA lets you own real physical gold inside your retirement account. More investors, especially those with at least $50,000 in retirement savings, are turning to this as a way to hedge against uncertainty. If you're curious about how it works, Augusta Precious Metals put together a free guide that breaks it all down: how gold IRAs work, why they're in demand, and whether they make sense for you. No cost, no catch, just information you can use. Click the link in the description and grab your copy today.
Well, my week was Wisconsin, where I wrote about the Supreme Court race, and I saw Tim Walz get about 800 people in a smallish college town. And then I went out with Bernie, so I saw different versions of Democratic resistance as it's happening right now. A lot of it oriented around Elon and opposing, in Sanders's term, oligarchy. And yes, the I covered Sanders in 16 and 20, more closely in 16 because other people at the Washington Post at the time were covering the Sanders beat after that. And this was comparable in scale to one of his presidential rallies, actually larger. So he has been doing rallies for 3 weekends, originally in places where Republicans won the race for Congress and Democrats could win it back. The one in Colorado he went to, I think it was a 2,500 vote Republican win margin. But then he's been adding big cities where they can get a huge rally, and that was Denver. Denver, there's not a Republican district that is flippable around there, but they wanted to show strength, and they got one. They got, by their count, the Friends of Bernie Sanders. And I keep saying campaign, but it's not a campaign. They said 32,000 people, which would be the biggest rally he's ever had. You can quibble with the math, but that if somebody said right now I'm running for president, I'm Wes Moore and I'm going to Denver, come rally for me, he wouldn't get 32,000 people. He wouldn't get close to that. And so this was bigger than what I was seeing at this point in 2009 for Tea Party rallies. And the Tea Party was ramping up. They had April 15th was their first big set of rallies, but that was more about scale. That was more about as many events, as many communities as possible to show that there was a wide, broad resistance to Barack Obama and Obamacare. This is a show of strength by the Bernie Sanders operation that was pulling in a ton of non-Bernie Sanders voters. And that's a final quick point I'll make about it, is that they said their data showed half the people at these rallies had never been on the Bernie list before. And it's a very big list. He built this list of supporters and donors for 2 campaigns, plus the Senate races. And this included a ton of people who were never, ever going to vote for Bernie. And my experience talking to people in the crowd backed that up. Lots of what you would call normie Democrats, people who loved Hillary and loved Kamala Harris and were very depressed about the election. And they were not even sure if they were ever going to vote for AOC, but they wanted to be part of something right now.
Okay, so I was actually just going to ask you about that, because having covered the Tea Party rallies and some of the early Trump movement, that is really, I'm curious if you have the same sense. That's sort of similar. My impression is that you did have a lot of, I don't want to say this pejoratively, but the hangers-on, the normies who wanted to feel the vibes because they're really, really frustrated. So what was your sense of why people in such apparently large numbers were drawn to these events?
They wanted to do something and feel like they were part of a fight back to Trump and to Musk. And really, Musk is a central figure in this resistance to the administration. Sanders articulates it that he is part of an oligarchy. He has, when he gets up on stage, he talks about Trump's inauguration and how he was flanked by the richest people in the country. Then there were even more billionaires behind him. And the Sanders is very good at polarizing the ultra wealthy who did support Donald Trump. There are ultra wealthy guys who support Democrats too, and he'll mention them. But polarizing this moment and saying, we know who is trying to wreck the country. We know who's trying to shrink benefits, cut taxes. It's these wealthy people who bought the Trump administration. And that is something that Democrats, by and large, agree with. It's actually, when I bring up Walz, not because I saw him, but because he really wanted to make that a bigger part of the 2024 campaign when Musk kept spending money.
I guess I'm also curious what you make of the numbers. We talked about this a little bit, but Elon Musk retweeted what appeared to me at least to be a very dubious assessment, that this was, just paid shows, all astroturfed. A lot of the people had been
Yeah.
at other rallies and that sort of thing just last night. But, having been on the ground, usually you can sort of sniff that type of thing out. Did this feel astroturfed to you, Dave?
No, and so that is generally what people do if they're annoyed that somebody got a big protest they wanted to lose. It's true that there are large donors funding groups like Indivisible, Run for Something. I don't want to do a litany of every progressive group, but yeah, we live in a capitalist country. Citizens United and Speech Now exist, and they're the president. And progressives have a network of small donors and large donors that actually Republicans are trying to attack. That's a different conversation right now. This was more organic. This was just Denver is a very liberal city. People were showing up with either their campaign gear or their patriotic gear. Or just I saw a lot more Patagonia than anything else. And they all destitute and they needed immediate help from the government. No, it was not people asking for handouts or payment to protest. They wanted to be part of a protest. They have been angry since the election that nothing was stopping Trump except for some courts. And so they showed up in those numbers. Sanders' operation, which is not a presidential campaign, it's just called Friends of Bernie Sanders. It funds his political organizations. It's raised money from small donors, but it is not distributing it to people. The most people were getting was free water at different parts of the event when they got in, and they heard some free music. There was some musical entertainment, but it was not. And Nancy Pelosi did this when she talked about the Tea Party. Republicans were very unified in saying it is crazy and offensive for her to say Tea Party protests are astroturf. What she was saying was that the Koch funded and non-Koch funded groups, the conservative groups organizing, getting permits, well, they were not real because they were funded by right-wing money. And that's just always a losing argument. Is it not a real protest unless it springs like from the skull of Athena, just like it happens without any preparation? Like, no.
The protest region of France.
Protesters or get organized, but you can tell when something is our organization got 50 people to show up and yell versus 30,000 people are angry enough that they decided to walk to the center of Denver and rally.
Right. So having, again, covered Bernie rallies, they tend to be younger crowds, I imagine, is your experience. So I'm also curious about this because Tea Party crowds, again, I'm curious about your experience. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember we're older. You can go back and look at the images and the videos. So a lot of older people. So what did this crowd look like, just demographic makeup?
Well, it did. That's a good way to set it up. It did look more like a Tea Party circa 2009 crowd. It was older than a Bernie audience. And Bernie always got a mix of people. He had older. I remember the first trip I took with Bernie, campaign trip 2014, who've had Nation magazine subscriptions for 40 years. And then he started to get younger people the more he showed up, and his crowds were very young. This was very, very diverse by age. Less diverse by race, even though Denver is pretty diverse city, but enough. I mean, I was finding people of all races who showed up and had not voted for Bernie before, and that was key. Half the people at this rally, according to the Bernie folks' data, had not been part of a Sanders cause or campaign before. That matched what I was seeing. I was meeting, and Colorado it's one of the blue states that's still taking in more people than it's losing. I was meeting people who had lived in New York or lived in California and relocated to Colorado as they retired from their professional managerial class life or from their life in foreign aid or from their life as an attorney. And this is what they wanted to do because they had the time to get organized in politics now. So it was a very, very close to what I saw with the Tea Party, which was a lot of older and somewhat comfortable people. And comfort means lots of things. I mean, you're not worried about whether you're going to own your house when you die. You have your Social Security, your retirement, you're set, but then you have the time to protest. I did see a lot of that mixed in with younger people who you'd expect to see at a rally like that. But the final point I'd make is the optics also were much more Tea Party than they were left-wing protest. And I think that was important because let's say right now I got a permit and I said, we're having everyone who wants to protest Donald Trump show up in this square in DC. You'd probably see some Gaza flags and you'd see some signs that maybe have phrasing that you don't want that would get on Fox News and make you angry. And these protests were all the speakers from Sanders and AOC to union leaders they brought on with them, or local politicians. They were on a stage, and there was a lectern, and there was the American flag and the flag of the state that they were in, and they were really meant to look like this. We are representing the legitimate will of the people who want America to be good and like it was after the 1960s, the New Deal, anti-oligarchy. We are real Americans. We're not trying to destroy the system. We are trying to save it, which is much more of a Tea Party argument, much less of a left-wing America is a settler colonial state, and we need to do land acknowledgements until people realize that we need to give the land back. It was not like that. It was much more appealing to American tradition, which I think is really important for how they're structuring the resistance.
That's super interesting. Sort of make America great again type sentiment.
Yes, that's trademark, but something else they could figure out.
What does that bode for the future of left-wing populism? Because right now, I mean, Axios had a story this morning about how Democrats feel they don't have any figurehead to organize their resistance around, which is a funny juxtaposition with what happened over the course of the last week in the Bernie tour. It seems like he's pretty obviously a figurehead when he's drawing tens of thousands of people to rallies. So, I mean, is the jury still out on what happened to the Tea Party? Will it ultimately be co-opted by, as Bernie Sanders argues, oligarchs, by the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses? But from what we see right now, are Democrats, how are they reacting to Bernie's success? Maybe that tells us what we need to know going forward.
They've generally been positive about it. I've not. They're flying back into DC today, so I'm sure they'll get asked. And they have been embracing any sort of activism that is not over the top. The only criticism I've seen of Bernie, to get very specific, was that one of his rallies on this tour was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he brought Laura Jane Grace, who's a transgender musician who had a new song that I'm not afraid to. I don't know, I'm censoring myself. The song called God that begins, "Does your God have a big fat dick? Because I think he's fucking me." And Republicans locally tried to make a huge deal out of this. How dare Democrats invite this foul-mouthed transgender rock star who hates God? We're going to put in all of our literature that Democrats hate God. And in the debate for the Supreme Court race that is happening on April 1st, the Republicans said, I was offended by that speech. That's it. The Democrats distanced themselves from that 30 seconds of one rally. Otherwise, they're pretty happy with this because going back to the Tea Party, it was a real strength for the Tea Party that they didn't have a Tea Party leader who spoke for everybody. And whenever there was an attempt to say, we're going to come up with a manifesto, everyone's going to sign this list of this declaration of what we stand for, people didn't really pay attention to it. It was more, there's permanent organizing capacity that can be used to kick these Democrats out of power. So was there a leader of the Tea Party when Massachusetts Republicans organized and beat when they beat Martha Coakley and elected Scott Brown? There wasn't a Tea Party president, and it was good for them. This is still a very electoral movement. How do we win? How do we get organized and win elections? The only envy for a leader I find is for what Donald Trump has done to Republicans, which is that he does put out edicts and then Republicans follow them. He's changed the party so that people who would run to cameras and say, I don't like what Trump is doing, they're not there anymore. Mostly the senators, members of Congress. There's a few that'll criticize him a little bit. But if there is an idea bubbling up from conservative movement and Trump hears about it and he says, I like that idea, the party moves in his direction. Democrats, I think, have a lot of envy for that. They would disagree about who the leader should be, but they don't have that. Barack Obama didn't do that. Joe Biden didn't do that. They have a much more bottom-up style leadership, encouraged by Sanders, because one of the things he'll say at all his rallies is, it's not about me, it's about us. If people chant Bernie, he'll say, no, it's about you. You run for office. And that is much more like the original Tea Party. The Tea Party wasn't saying, hey, everybody, we love John Boehner. It was, these politicians are awful. If you're a small business owner, you should run for office yourself. And some of them did, car dealers and pizza shop owners. And I'm thinking of some of the people I covered in 2010. It's much more like that. It is. I don't think Democrats worry that they don't have a leader who can set the message for them and would at the same time be very attackable. Republicans could all say, let's sack them today. Let's embarrass this person today. The closest they came was Walz has said he liked the idea a shadow cabinet like they have in a parliamentary country, where, all right, we need to message today on transportation. We've got Pete Buttigieg; he's the best at it. You go and do it. They do want to be part of the conversation, but they made peace with how the media is so atomized and so broken that if you can't have a leader that gives a speech, and then the speech is broadcast everywhere. Maybe it's better to have a bunch of people in the streets teaming and coming up with different ideas, and Republicans not knowing where it's coming from.
Well, you know this as well as anyone. There was some caution during the Tea Party years about talking about entitlements in certain ways, and in different contexts, there was literally no caution whatsoever. You would hear very like libertarian Musk-esque, the way he talks about entitlements today, types of sentiments. But what ended up happening is you know, the Thomas Massey saying that, you know, he would go to all of these rallies for Rand Paul and Ron Paul, and eventually when Trump came along, he learned that people were just looking for the craziest son of a bitch in the race, is what he told us at the Examiner. Yeah. I don't know, it was probably 2017. And I wonder how that dynamic is potentially playing out here. Are Democrats so mad right now that they're willing to graft this anti-establishment sentiment onto Bernie Sanders, but then they won't be happy with Medicare for all, or they won't be happy with some type of populist solution busting up big tech or whatever it is? I wonder if there's anything interesting about that dynamic potentially.
No, it's a really good question, because the other part of it is that the groups that were growing out of the Trump resistance in 2017 were generally pretty left wing, and Democrats are worried, rank and file Democrats, not just pundits or members of Congress. They are worried after 2020 and 2024, Biden won, but by less than they wanted him to, that about being too left wing, about coming up with some idea that Republicans then punch around and make completely unpopular. And that even came up in Denver. I started to ask people. I felt guilty because it's so early. No one's thinking about running for president or who they vote for president. But I said, okay, would you vote for AOC? And I met these people were talking about, these very middle class or upper middle class Democrats who will turn out and vote and max out to their candidates. And they were universally, although I only talked to about 6 people about this, they all said, well, I love her, but she couldn't win. I'm already worried that she can't win because she's a young woman and she's Latina, and we've seen that Kamala got hurt for her progressive views, and maybe they do that to her. They already were biting their nails about how somebody could be demonized. And so there is, as much as there is this desire to resist Trump, there is a worry that the party could go too far left and blow it. Not with Sanders, but Sanders is strategic in what he talks about. I do think just any speech you should listen to what they say and what they left out. And Sanders was not up at these rallies like denouncing the Laken Riley Act, for example. He was denouncing the CR. He was denouncing cuts to the VA. He was denouncing cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. He was denouncing tax cuts. He had a very coherent. There was a rich oligarchy redistributing wealth to themselves, and that's bad. But he was not saying, let's pick up every single progressive cause and march on it. And me and ABC had separate interviews with him, but we both asked about immigration, and he, did not take the opportunity to say, yes, we need to reverse every Trump policy. He actually, to ABC, was pretty positive about reducing illegal immigration the way Trump had done. And so, yeah, that difference is it's not 2017. There's not a lot of progressive groups with credibility that can say, stop that. We're all going to bring about the total progressive revolution when we win. They really, by losing, and unlike some 2020 Republicans, by saying, no, we lost, we really did. We really got destroyed. We lost a bunch of people who we thought we were going to win. They're both more aggressive about how they need to oppose Republicans, but I think more careful on which ideas they should embrace, because they've seen too many ads on their phones attacking some Democrat they like for saying something like defund the police.
Well, this is just my last thought that I want to run by you. I wonder if the oligarchy is sort of a convenient culture war stand-in. You maybe don't have to be the Resistance 2017 talking points on immigration, trans rights, BLM, etc., when you can kind of signal where you are in the culture war by going after Elon and the oligarchy. I don't know, because there's also a sort of economic dynamic to that too.
Yeah, well, if they want to puncture this idea, Bernie, Schumer, everybody, this idea that the working class populist party is the Republican Party. And this is, I can be kind of discursive. I don't want to get too discursive. It is interesting listening to Sanders talk about Democrats. He doesn't give Biden credit for trying to do a bunch of progressive things, actually succeeding. He doesn't say we had a great NLRB, we had a great
Yeah.
FTC, he had an FTC commissioner with him. He doesn't say Biden made these strides. He says Democrats didn't do enough for the working class. Both parties have too many billionaire donors. And what he's trying to do is harder than what Trump ended up pulling off, which is Trump ran from outside the party. And he wasn't giving speeches in Iowa in 2015 saying, you know what, George Bush did expand Medicare for Part D, and I like it. He said both parties are terrible. We're going to blow them up. I'm going to change the GOP. And once he succeeded, that turned out to be the skeleton key to the electorate. I talked about Sanders. I talked with this about Sanders in a different interview because I asked him, there's a lot of people who voted for you, and then they voted for Trump, and they become pro-Trump pundits. Have you thought about that? Why did that happen? He said, yeah, anti-establishment politics are very powerful, and Republicans have captured it. The way he's formulating things now is, what's the establishment? That's a term anybody can use. But oligarchy, you can tell who are the richest people in the country, who are the richest people in the world, what sort of government are they organizing for themselves? How come you have to pay so much for healthcare and house, and they're cutting it? How come they're cutting this program that would be beneficial to you? It's to you. It's not the guy who doesn't deserve it. It's not the welfare queen. This is Medicaid that somebody you know is on. He's trying to come up with a anti-oligarchy politics because I don't think he's crazy about this. Just to win elections, you need to be against some giant powerful thing that is the reason that your life is not going as well as it could. Because Americans have said they're pretty unhappy with the way the country is going and with institutions for 20 years, 25 years. I think we had a bump after 9/11 and then not after that. And the Sanders theory is if our movement, and it's Democrats, independents, whatever, if we're seen as the guys who will tax the rich and give you more stuff, that is powerful. There's going to be a consultant who's paid by rich guys who says that's terrible, that's alienating. People will say that's communist, and he's saying, no, trust me. Like, look at Donald Trump. He's been able to take that argument from us because he's so rich that people trust him. They'll say, well, what? Of course, Donald Trump is a billionaire, but he's fighting for me. That's very powerful. Sanders is saying, what would be that powerful? What would orient people around our causes that would convince them if we win, we're going to smash the guy who's making their life worse? For him, it's oligarchy. TBD. that is going to be tested because that's what he was trying to run on for president, and it didn't quite work. But they're all going to be operating in a climate that's not Donald Trump running for president anymore. It'll be J.D. Vance running as the leader of the party. It's Elon Musk as the most prominent person in government. And that's the one thing Democrats, I think, agree on, Sanders and Schumer, is that as popular as Elon Musk has been, as much as a lot of people are inspired by him creating things with his companies, sustaining this and saying for week after week, hey, do you have a problem with how a bunch of people got fired from the VA and your call time went up while this guy got another space contract? Why do you think that is? Just pushing those questions so that you can build this resistance that's not based on I'm a Democrat, but based on I want to beat those guys and take stuff away from them. Because that's what Republicans did. The Republicans had a very coherent, you need to beat these leftists and take their stuff away because they made your life worse. They locked you up in COVID. We don't need to go through the litany. And they're doing it. They're using the power. They're using the government to redistribute resources, get rid of a bunch of left-wing people in universities and law firms in the government. What is the Democratic answer? It's got to be going after the super rich. And even if that hurts Reid Hoffman's feelings or George Soros's feelings, we got to keep doing it. That is the theory. And it actually, at the end of the week, as chaotic as Democrats were, I ended the week in these rallies saying, all right, don't know if that'll work, but that is an idea. And that is something that they have not tried to do in quite some time.
Interesting. Dave Weigel, thank you so much. This is fascinating.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv. You get a weekly newsletter from me. You get paywalled premium episodes of the show and an email address where you can communicate with us and ask us questions. So make sure to head over there. For more content from Unheard and from Undercurrents, the Tea Party parallels are really hard to miss. This is a very interesting juxtaposition as someone like me. If you're roughly my age and you're on the right in the conservative movement, you came up during the Tea Party years, and the populist momentum was almost like fiscal libertarianism, but it was culturally something much bigger, much deeper. And that's what Donald Trump picked up on and turned into MAGA. Has a different, I guess, perspective. We talked about this with Dave on like entitlements than a lot of people who came up during the Tea Party thought. And this gets back to the Thomas Massie quote. This was Massie to the Washington Examiner editorial board when I worked there. This must have been 2017, 2018. I mentioned the quote to Dave, but he said he was going to all these libertarian rallies and thought everybody was really excited about libertarian economics and realized that they were just looking for the craziest son of a bitch in the race. And so what does that mean for Democrats? Does that mean they will coalesce and devote significant energy from the base to the craziest son of a bitch they can find because they're sick of the party's leadership being so tied to the political class, to the political establishment? That's pretty interesting because Democrats are also, from a class perspective, shifting to being more of an educated upper class party. It's kind of flipping with Republicans over the course of decades. And so is there that anti-establishment sentiment among, upper middle class educated Democrats, people making six figures with college educations? It's a pretty interesting question, actually, and I think we're about to find out. I mean, institutional trust is very, very low, so it stands to reason that people's sentiments are fairly anti-establishment across the board, but then do those normie Democrats who are now showing up for Bernie rallies, as Dave put it, go along, when in the next primary or during the midterm cycle that's coming up so quickly, even though it seems ridiculous to think about, are they turned off by Democrats on culture war issues? Are they turned off if they can't sort of cohere around this anti-oligarchy message and still get pulled in a bunch of different directions on the culture war? As Dave mentioned, that example from the Bernie rally in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, this is where Democrats are figuring it out right now. It's not all bad news for the left. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be covering this as much as we can because it's fascinating, and we'll see you back here with more Undercurrents soon.